Hey there, thanks for joining me today. This is Laura Lynn with Keep Inking Up. I'm an independent demonstrator for Stampin' Up! In San Antonio, Texas. And this is the fourth video in my series about embossing folders. And we're going to once again use the Tree Rings 3D embossing folder. I just think this is a wonderful folder. It's a hybrid embossing folder. And in the last video, hopefully you've seen it already, but we did some stamping with the embossing folder. This did not use the Stampin' Die Cut and Emboss machine. I simply inked it and stamped it. And so that is what that looks like with this embossing folder. Now if you were to just straight emboss it, this is what you would get, these tree rings. And you can use either the embossed side or the debossed side. And that's what it looks like. But today we're going to combine these two ideas and we're going to add ink to the embossing folder and run it through the embossing machine and see what the results are. So to do that, I'm going to open up my embossing folder and then I'm going to bring in some soft suede ink and a blending brush. Now in the past, what I have done is I have just simply did direct to embossing folder with the ink pad and I just put a lot of ink on there. But I have to be honest with you, I wasn't really impressed with the results every time and I tended to not use them on my project. So this is a different method of applying ink to the embossing folders and I have been much happier with the results and I think that you will be too. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to load up my brush with some ink and then I'm going to add the ink directly to the embossing folder. And we're going to add ink on both sides of the embossing folder, so it doesn't matter which side that you use. You can use both, and we're going to see what results on both ways, both sides, and then you can decide which way you want to use for your projects. So I'm going to keep adding ink. The nice thing about this method is you can just keep adding more and more ink. So if you want a more subtle effect, you can do that. Or if you want to just keep adding more and more ink, you can, to get a more dramatic look. So hopefully you can see that there's ink on there. I didn't go to the edges because my paper that I'm going to be using doesn't go all the way to the edge. Oops. So let me bring in, I have a piece of crumb cake cardstock. So I am going to carefully place this in the center of the embossing folder. I'm going to close it. And then I'm going to run this through my Stampin' Cut and Emboss machine. So to do that, I'm going to bring in my base plate number 1. I'm going to stick my embossing folder with the cardstock and ink on there. And then I'm going to top that off with the embossing plate number 4. And I have my Stampin' Cut and Emboss machine off to the side over here. And I will run this through. And then we'll show you what happens. So I'm going to take this off, open this up, and there you can see hopefully the ink on the tree rings. Isn't that nice? To me this is a subtle look, so this is a really nice background, but if I wanted it more intense, I probably would go with a darker ink color rather than continuing to add more ink, but you could just keep adding more ink onto the embossing folder. But if I wanted it to be more intense, I probably would go with a darker ink color, probably early espresso, if I wanted it to be more dramatic. So that's what that side of the folder looks like. So let's go ahead and turn this around and add ink on the other side, and so you can see how different that looks. So I'm going to once again add ink with my blending brush onto the other side of the embossing folder. And you can do this with absolutely any embossing folder you have. It doesn't even have to be a 3D embossing folder. It can be any embossing folder. You can add ink on either side, stick your cardstock in there, and then see what happens. That's the fun of it. Just see what happens. Give it a try and see what fabulous looks that you can come up with while doing this process. Okay, I think I've added enough ink. Can you see that ink on there? So I'm going to grab another piece of crumb cake cardstock. I'm going to stick this down on here, close it up, and put my base plate on top again, and run that through my machine over here. My Stampin' Cut machine over here on the side. Okay, let's see what this looks like. And there we have the ink on the other side. So let me go ahead and bring these back in so you can see for comparison. So this is the stamped version, no embossing. This is inked with embossing on one side of the folder. This is inked with embossing on the other side, and this is just embossed. So you can kind of see the difference between these two right here, where this one has ink and this one does not. And then you can also probably realize that these are mirrored. Get this closed, I don't want to get ink everywhere. These two are actually mirrored, and you can then use the coordinating die to cut these tree rings out on any of these. You can line up. You can line up and cut those out. This one you have to go to the other side, line up to cut on this side in order, and then you can use that side on your projects. And well, you can get the idea. You just have to line up with whatever lines up with the die. But those are what you can do. So I wanted to share how you can use ink with your embossing folders and get some very different looks. What did I do? There it is. So hopefully you can see all of the different looks that you can get by just adding ink to your embossing folders. So thank you again so much for watching. I hope that you learned something new and that you will add ink to your embossing folders. Give it a try and see what happens. I bet you'll be really pleased with the results. Okay, thanks again, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.